welcome to today's episode of the Dive Into Reiki podcast. Today, with a guest that is very close to my heart, Parita. We live in the same area, we had some trainings together. It's been lovely to see her evolution during these past few years. And Parita is actually based in Long Island. She became interested in Reiki and meditation when she realized that the stress of her health issues were causing more health issues. In 2015, Parita studied mindfulness meditation and began her Reiki training in the Usui lineage. She has worked with clients through autoimmune conditions, headaches, back pain, anxiety, depression, cancer, arthritis, eating disorder, and other health conditions. She's also supported them post surgery and has volunteered at the hospice. Parita is also a great communicator, which I deeply admire as a writer myself. When it comes to Reiki, she creates very interesting, very clear content on social media and her blog. And she's also a participant in the Reiki Race Global Summit. She was last year, and I believe she's going to be again this year. So I'm really glad to welcome her to the podcast today. So, welcome, Parita, to the Dive Into Reiki podcast. I'm so grateful you said yes and made the time to be here.
Thank you for having me.
And we've probably known each other for quite a few years now, and I love because we come together, we share our practice, and then we separate, we evolve our own different way. But the one thing I have not heard a lot, and I would love to share with people, and it's the way I start every interview, is a little bit of your journey. When was the first time you came into contact with Reiki, and how you fell in love with it?
Yes, thank you for asking. It's been a long journey, and I came to Reiki, I want to say maybe about 10, 12 years ago when I was dealing with some chronic health issues. And I was 19 and I was diagnosed with celiac disease. And within a few months, I went from being very healthy and taking my health for granted to losing a lot of weight, losing hair, like heart palpitations, eczema, chronic UTIs, like all of a sudden had a dozen symptoms. And I was fighting for a diagnosis. I was trying to figure out what was happening. It was my first time navigating healthcare in the US, and I always thought, oh, like it must be the best in the world. And I quickly realized that it was a frustrating process. So I was going, and this was while I was in college. So I was trying to find a diagnosis, and then I quickly learned I had celiac disease. So I was going gluten free, trying to navigate all of those changes. I had to take a break from college, so I left friends, left the opportunities that I had, and I was looking for ways to cope because it was very hard to navigate all of those emotions of frustration and just not knowing what was next, the uncertainty that can come from being sick. So I was looking for ways to manage my mind and my emotions. And I remember I had heard of Reiki as a way of like relaxing, and I was very much focused on the physical healing at first. So I just wanted something that would take my symptoms away. But over time, I realized that Reiki can do that, but it's by managing the mind and the emotions, and it's all really just one. You can't get one but not choose the other. So yeah, I came to it slowly. My first experience with Reiki was at a circle. My yoga studio was offering a Reiki circle, and it was a great way for me to just try it out. I remember the first time I could just feel the warmth in the practitioner's hands. And I recently wrote about this, but it felt like a radiator. And my human mind, my logical mind couldn't interpret like how that was possible. So my first experience was like I didn't know exactly what to make of it, and I wasn't like blown away by it, but I was also just like, there's something going on here, and I have to see what this is about. I have to learn more. And so that's kind of like where it began. Um, and yeah, slowly from there, I got trained. I started seeing that it was helping me to stay calm and balanced. So I continued with it. And now it's, yeah, been about, I think, 10, 12 years now.
Wow, that's a long time because yeah, again, I must have known you 6, 7 years ago. So it's incredible how it adds up. And I think, and I know when we just learn, we feel we know a lot. And what I love about Reiki is you can just be trained and it works. But there is a certain depth that comes from years of practice that, you know, and this is not better or worse, that is quite lovely. And I've seen it shown in your work as well, in the way you write and what you're putting out there. It's been a beautiful evolution to follow. And that also shows you've been practicing a lot, right? Because if we don't
Thank you.
practice, and you probably will be telling me the same thing when we just met 6, 7 years ago. So
Yeah.
10 years very well used. For those
Thank
of you who
you.
may not know, Parita and I had some trainings together, and we live both in the New York City area. So, you're gonna feel probably, if you're not seeing this, just hearing there is like a lot of like love on going on, and that's part of it. But so when did you decide to go from receiving the benefits of like, okay, I'm healing, I'm going through this challenging like health issue, to I may want to be a practitioner of Reiki?
It's funny. It's another long story, but so I was going to school to study finance, and I was always raised with this belief that you work really hard, you do well in school, you get into the best college that you can get into, and again, you study, you get the best job opportunity that you can get, and you create the stable life with a stable paycheck. So I always dreamed of that. And to be honest, I actually enjoyed finance. So that's what I had envisioned. And then when I got sick, the universe was screaming at me that I couldn't continue this. This wasn't my route, and my body needed something different. I couldn't work your typical 40, 50, 60 hours a week and manage what was going on with my health. But it was a very long process of surrendering to that. Like I kept trying to go back to university and go back to my career in finance. I was always trying to find my way to do that, but every step of the way, um, my body would tell me that that's not my route, and then also like my soul was telling me that Reiki was a part of my path. So, as I started to learn how to cope and learn how to receive the benefits of Reiki, I also felt like, okay, there's more people out there that are dealing with chronic illness or just any transition, any tough time in their life, and they need to receive these practices. So, that's how I got started with Reiki. It was a couple years after I started training in it. And within the first few sessions, I realized how fulfilling it is. Like you get to impact people's lives forever. You know, even if you have one session with them, that could be very like transformative in their life. So it's just been a very fulfilling ride. And just such a like a privilege and honor that I'm sure you can relate to as well.
Yeah, no, it's and I had a similar experience with you. I didn't fall in love with it the first time, but I could not let it go. And then I kept digging and digging, and then one day suddenly, like it really sparked that passion for the practice. But I'm also very interested because you have done your trainings in different lineages, right? So obviously you have like a cultural background that is very more tied to the chakras, and you did training Western Reiki, but you've also been analyzing or training in Japanese Reiki. And my question was a little bit like, how did you come up with your own style, like having all that information available to you? What has been your process to say, this is what Parita teaches as a Reiki teacher?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been quite a journey coming to all of that. Initially, I was taking in, anything that was accessible to me, anything that was in my area and also affordable. So I mean, I just signed up for whoever was recommended to me, and I didn't understand that there were many lineages and the differences. So this is definitely something that just comes over time. You can't pick the right lineage to begin with, and really there is no right. It's just a matter of like you have to take the teachings that resonate with you. And all of us continue to train and retrain. Reiki training is usually not something that people do once and then they never feel like studying again. Or, I mean, they may choose to leave it behind, but usually the people who continue to practice, they usually end up retraining. So, initially, I just took what was available, and then over the years, it's been nice that I've come across more teachers, and um, it's only natural. You're going to start questioning like what else is out there, what is really true to the practice. And I remember my first training was like focused on hands-on healing, and there was less emphasis on meditation. Um, there was some emphasis on the precepts, but I realized later on that there is actually so much more that we can meditate on when it comes to the precepts. So, and I think in recent years, it's just become a lot more accessible. Like there's even a lot more books that offer you like the deep practices of Usui Reiki that just weren't there like 10 years ago. So even in this short period of time, I've seen a lot come available. And so that's also helped a lot. But over the years, I've just had to give myself permission and say, well, anything that works is what I want to share forward. If it helps me feel better in mind, body, or spirit, then I just want to share that forward. And we've definitely had a lot of conversations on this, and you've guided me to like, yeah, share anything, but just tell people where it comes from and tell people what time frame it comes from. So I didn't recognize this initially, but I realized later on that yes, chakras and Reiki come from two different places and two different time periods. So we have to just honor that and be upfront about that.
Yeah, but I love how simple you put it. I share what works for me, right? Like I share what really helps, because sometimes we become also a little bit of purist, and I'm like I stick to Japanese style because it's very simple. But even myself, I try to sometimes not become rigid because we can be purist. And there is billions of human beings, and I think sharing what works respectfully is such a simple way, but such a great filter to choose what you teach or share with other people.
Yes, it's so true. And especially in this world where now so much information is available to us, and there's new articles written every day about new Reiki techniques and rituals, and you can use this crystal and listen to this frequency while you're doing Reiki. And so it's so much more important that we have to be able to filter out, does this resonate with me? Does it make sense? And then just keep whatever works. Just because it's trendy doesn't mean that you can't do it. And also, just because it's trendy doesn't mean that you have to try it. So that was definitely a process for me as well. I've spent a lot of money on so many things. I've squandered a lot of energy trying out things just because people were talking about it. And then I came to the realization that I have to integrate these teachings, like take it one step at a time, practice, and then also give myself permission to like let go of things that aren't working. So it doesn't matter if my teacher has been practicing something for 20 years, but if I don't feel called to it right now, I can just leave it in the back burner and get to it later on if it calls to me.
I like that. And I would love to ask you one thing that you recently have let go, if you can come up with one.
Um, So I think like Joshin Kokyuho is something that I don't practice in the very traditional sense. I've practiced it regularly, like when I was doing my trainings. And then when I come to it, I just bring more awareness to the hara rather than doing the whole cycle religiously the way that it was taught to me initially.
But that's lovely because, and again, as you say, you have it back, right? And I love your honesty. Like, I don't do Joshinko Kyoho, everybody, or I don't do it traditionally, right? Because also that same experience of Joshinko Kyoho, and that's where I think we also cannot be so rigid about things. We may practice Joshinko Kyoho for 20 years, but the experience changes. And sometimes we feel like what I'm practicing, if I'm practicing, is like, it's not even the same Joshinko Kyoho I learned, even though I'm doing kind of like the same intention and supposedly the same practice, right? Because we change as well. And I think that's why, as you said, letting go or putting stuff on the shelf for a bit is very important as well. And then perhaps come back if you're called to it and see how it has changed.
Right, exactly. Yeah, like I've gone through periods where I needed to practice it and I would get a lot out of practicing it. And then it's like almost like the symbols, when you work with it regularly, then something about that just stays with you and you don't need to practice it every single day in order for it to be a part of you. It's just with you. I think you kind of describe the symbols in the same way that you don't always have to draw the symbols in order to feel their essence within you, because if you've already worked with them for a long time, it's just there.
Yeah, you remember you are them. And I don't say, well, we can say some of them are earth energy, heavenly energy, right? Like interconnection.
Mhm.
Remember, we already are like earth and heaven, and you just have that state of mind. At the end, they're training wheels, right? They're almost reminders. And some days I have to say, when I'm very crazy, I use them, but I use them just as an anchor. Like, okay, I need my anchor because I'm all over the place, but it's not like I need the symbol to connect to the energy. It's like, oh, today I need a little bit of a focus tool. So for,
Mhm.
again, the symbols also evolve the way we use them. And as you say, we don't need to use them every day. We can just, they are there when we need them, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's been really fun revisiting some of the symbol techniques because I've been recently practicing with that. And it's nice to know that you just don't have to go to it every single day, but rather, um, you can think about the symbol and its essence just comes forward.
Yeah, it's lovely. And asking you, because I asked you, what do you let go? And what is one thing that you have incorporated to either your practice or your teaching lately?
Um, I'm definitely revisiting the mantra chanting right now because I was just teaching Okuden, so the symbols are really fresh, and I feel like if I'm telling my students to revisit those meditations, then I want to also revisit them. And of course, I mean, we all work with the symbols so regularly as Reiki practitioners, but I'm visiting like chanting again, and I've been allowing for the essence to kind of just shift my consciousness and being a witness to how that is changing me.
Lovely. And I love that because, right, chanting was something we do often when we're training and then we let go of the chanting. So revisiting is wonderful.
Hmm.
And I have a question, but my mind just blanked. So I know, now I remember. Sorry, that's what happens late at night. So, and I'll cut this pause when I edit, don't worry.
No worries.
Okay, now I got it. So I also, regarding the chanting, you actually put out some music, or I don't know how to say, like mantra chanting that is recorded and people can actually access. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I very much inspired by my training with you. And, in level three with you, level two, we did chanting of the mantras. And I know you also have us chant a little bit differently because you use the Jumon. And I was experimenting with both in the training. So sometimes I would chant with the vowels and sometimes with the mantra itself. And especially in that season of life, I was very much connected with the mantras. So I produced these mantras, had someone sing the vocals and create music for the four symbols of Usui Reiki. And so that's available on my website. It's like a meditation album that people can download, and they can either chant with the mantra or just listen to it. And it helps to invoke the essence of each symbol. And a lot of people find that they have this very deep energetic experience, and also understanding of the symbols as they build a relationship with them.
Perfect. And you do a lot of tools. One other thing I really dig about you and I admire very much is how you communicate, and whatever there is not something you created. I know you're into finance, but for me, you're almost like, I see you almost like you study communications because you're a good writer. You create manuals, you created this beautiful production of the mantras. So where did that ability to communicate and create tools for the Reiki or to teach came from? And how did you develop it?
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny. I haven't seen myself that in that way, but when you describe it, I realize that yes, a lot of my efforts have gone towards just spreading the teachings of Reiki, and whether it's been like content creation or creating courses, um, I used it somewhat as a way of healing myself and figuring out what I stand for, what do I believe in, because writing the blog posts helps me get very clear as well on what it is that I practice, how has it shifted me, and it helps me get clear on like what are the tools that really work, how can people do this. And it's also a great way of building community. You can reach people around the world and they'll tell you like, yes, I tried that, it worked, or like they'll ask you questions like, how do I do this? Or this isn't working for me. But I was also drawn to it just because I see these gaps in the market where, like, I took the training with you and I was like, I've never heard of chanting the mantras before, and they're not on the internet. Like, it wasn't possible a couple of years ago to find a download of the mantras and then chant with them. So, part of it is like I'm just creating the tools that I wish were there when I was training, or like wanting to also share that forward. And so yeah, that's kind of what inspires me to either write the blogs or the courses and digital downloads. I just feel like these teachings need to be more accessible.
No, I think that's great. And that's the way my own book came to be, right? I needed something more visual for myself, ended up being a book. But I think you said something, and I was in Paris teaching a class, and the subject of the class started with the same way. The way you define your practice, a lot of time we focus on convincing others, right? Like I write a blog post, I tell you what Reiki is to convince you to take a class, to come and take a session. But actually, is about having a clear objective regarding your practice. So when you said that you write to gain your own clarity, I think that for me is such a big tip for anyone listening, because you're writing for yourself from and clarifying what you practice and where you are in your practice is versus trying to publicize or make it bigger or more appealing, or writing for a place perhaps less authentic.
Mhm.
I think writing, we see it as marketing, we see it as something, but for me, it's really an exercise of reflection and clarity of your practice. So I love that you share that as well.
Yes, it's so true. And I was just speaking to a practitioner who was saying, like, she wants to create more of a practice and draw clients in. So we were talking about content creation, being on social media, but I was saying that content creation, it often gets this really bad rep and it feels icky. And sometimes it does for me as well, but at the same time, like there is an aspect of it that's very educational, and it's like being of service. You get to share exactly what you wish people. You get to share what you wish you knew when you got started. And so that's often what I reflect on when I'm creating either a training or a blog post. And then, yes, it's also like you're re-educating yourself every time you revisit your teachings. So I could write about the symbols and I'm like just like refreshing my memory. And oftentimes, what happens is I fall in love with the teachings all over again. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I want to get back to that practice and make time for this practice again.
I love that you share that. And I love that as a big tip, writing with the mentality of being of service versus trying to do marketing. I think that is a big one. I actually love my Instagram. I even forget that people may see it as a marketing thing because for me, writing complex, abstract ideas into a two-liner for a post takes a lot of reflection and practice. And I think for me, it's a great exercise. Like, can you define Reiki in one sentence? Can you explain a concept like non-duality in a line, right? Or the importance of posture. So for me, this is also an invitation to everyone to sometimes take writing and lose the fear. It's really an exploration. It's not about getting the right words. And hopefully your words will change over the years as well.
Yes, that's so important. Just allowing things to change. Sometimes I do look at old content and I'm like, oh, I don't think I really mean it that way. But it's so important to just not pick yourself apart and to say, like, it's okay. Now I see it differently. And maybe I practice a little bit differently than the way that I interpreted Reiki 5 years ago. That's like totally fine. And in fact, yeah, just as you said, we should see growth in our work.
Yeah, if you're posting the same as 5 years ago, then you need to check. But I have a question because also you come across as very, a little bit shy, a little bit introverted, but you have a big presence out there online. You're, on social media. What is your one tip to let go of that fear of like sharing stuff and putting yourself out there for people who may
Yes,
be struggling with that?
it's like it's both true. I do feel very shy, and I never imagined that I would be putting myself out there online. But at the same time, it's really just the passion that fuels us. Like again, you feel like you've benefited so much from a practice, and it could be anything, not just Reiki, but if there's something out there that has helped you and you want to share that with others, then in this day and age, the best way to do that is to put it out there online. Unless you're doing something like word of mouth or events or something of that sort. But yeah, like I've also found that it's really important to honor what platform it like speaks to you and calls to you, and also what medium works for you. So it took me a lot of trial and error and to realize that the blog is the way that I prefer to communicate. So some people will experiment with a YouTube channel or podcast, Instagram, all these different platforms that are out there right now. And if you try to do what someone else is doing or you try to fit into a mold, it's going to be really hard. And so part of why I can show up is because I figured out which content I prefer to create. And so for this season of life, it's a blog for me, but that's also, I'm sure that's going to change over time. And so I'm trying to be flexible with that.
I love that you mentioned that, especially because today there are also 300 social platforms and people go crazy trying to do all of them or repeating the same content on all of them and it doesn't work. I think when you said choose your medium, choose your platform, that is probably like whoever is listening to this, please pay attention to that one. It's very, very important. And you're gonna try when like I tried other ones. I tried Pinterest as well, where you are there with a big presence. I could not make like I just did not enjoy it. I lasted a week. And that's it. And we have to be okay with that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so I'm always giving myself permission to do the same. Like I have some platforms where I'll be more regular and then some where I'm a little bit more irregular. But, and especially if you're a Reiki practitioner, you have to really own that a lot of us are just working for ourselves. We're just one person, and a lot of us don't even have assistants. So we have to really prioritize our time and our energy. Like we cannot get drained while creating content about Reiki. That would be pretty ironic.
Yeah, no, and then you create content for 8 hours a day and do one session a week, you know,
Right.
and don't
Yeah.
practice. No, I think that's lovely. And another thing I wanted, and before we shift a little bit towards you like teaching, but we had a discussion. I remember we were talking about business of Reiki was probably a year and a half ago or something like that in a previous podcast, and I'll link that in the notes of this episode. We were talking like I'm very much, and that's obviously when there is enough public, and that's my background in advertising, like decide who you want to talk to, try to make it very specific and focus on that, unless you live in a tiny town with 100 people. And you are more about, hey, no, I want to talk to anyone who may be interested in this healing. And what I love is both things work. So I would love to you also to talk a little bit about your vision about that.
Hmm. Yeah, so when I got started, again, I didn't envision myself as a Reiki practitioner. I didn't even know if Reiki was going to work. I really got started with my very first few sessions as an experiment, and I kind of just maybe hit rock bottom. I surrendered and I said, you know what, I'm just gonna see what comes of this. And I quickly realized that no, like Reiki works, and you can do this. You could do distant sessions, and so it wasn't like a marketing plan. I didn't have, it wasn't about making this into a career and saying, I want to work with a woman in their 30s and help them to figure out so and so. And I just kind of took on various groups of people, almost like anyone that came my way. I used to have offices in the Long Island area and also see clients virtually. So it was just a great learning opportunity to work with people of all ages and all different backgrounds, all different walks of life, from like 18-year-olds to the elderly, and people who were burnt out in their corporate jobs to like stay-at-home moms, or people who were coming to Reiki because they were trying to figure out their romantic life, or people who were dealing with chronic illness. And but I feel like Reiki is, again, so we know it's an intuitive energy. It's always going to flow wherever it's needed. And usually, so if you do practice intuitively and if you're getting messages, then those are anyways coming in from a higher source. So I don't necessarily on a human level need to relate to what's going on. If there is a client who is getting divorced, I don't have to have experience in that in order to hold space for them. I can always, like, I just show up the same way that I show up for everyone else, right? It's in compassion and non-judgment and presence. And I don't have to give them like experience or my advice. So for that reason, I feel like us Reiki practitioners can actually hold space for anyone who comes our way. And I particularly enjoy it because it allows me to like also get out of my way. Like I can get out of my head and just hold space for them no matter where they are. And some people are living very different lives than me, but I get to share moments of empathy for them. So that's been pretty fun.
And I love that because, and what you said, like you show up in the same way for everyone. And I think at the end, that's it. We're just holding space, right? So that's why both things work. Some of us, we can have a very clear or more focused approach to what we offer in Reiki. And then you have the more open, and they both work. And I think that is sometimes hard for people. Like it's a little paradoxical, having two truths that are opposite.
Mhm.
And I think is what you said, whatever resonates with you, as long as you're clear when you direct to everybody, how. And I think you have a very clear way of why you like to be with everyone and about holding the space versus I'm open to anyone because I'm desperate for having a client reach out to me. And I think that is the clarity of your purpose, I think, is what really makes the difference.
Yeah, it's more so about the process. I feel like the process that I go through with clients in an energy healing session is the same across the board. There's a little bit of reflection on what their goals and their challenges are, and then when we do the energy work, again, we're just holding space and being with their body, being with their chakras or their nervous system, their minds and emotions. So, yeah, like I said, we don't have to go through what they've gone through in order to help them. And yeah, it's really important, like to just honor what resonates with you. There are people out there who have a very target market, like a very niche area that they prefer to work in. And that's great. Like, if you feel called to really just work with people who have a certain illness or you only want to work with animals, then I think you should definitely follow that calling.
Perfect. And you also have been teaching online, and this is a subject everybody who's known the podcast for 3 years and a half already, almost 4. Oh my God, it's a lot of time. Knows that I'm like a person. I tend to really appreciate the in person. I actually teach hybrid. I think that's what works best for me. I do half of it online and half in person, and that gives me everything I want because it gives me that, the attunement in person and everything. Tell me a little bit how you're teaching today and a little bit of your experience.
Yeah, thank you for asking. Um, I was also like just very suspicious in the beginning about online attunements or online Reiki trainings because I did most of mine in person and they were live. Whereas, and I always heard like, do Reiki attunements online work? Do they not? And so I think when I trained with you, I realized that the hybrid model is great. You could do some of it online, and especially when you're sharing a lot of content, right? You're just giving them lots of facts and history, concepts to take in. It really makes sense that that can definitely be done online. And then one thing I also took away from training with you is that I think we did our trainings over a 6 week period, and like over the 6 weeks, it really gave us time to integrate the teachings and take in like one meditation at a time, one concept at a time. We probably covered, I don't know, maybe about 6, 8, or even 10 different meditations. And that's just not possible if you're doing it over 1 or 2 days. So I very quickly realized that I wanted to follow that same path and offer these teachings over time so that people can integrate the energy and integrate the teachings. Um, and then, so I think it was like maybe during COVID that inspired me to go and try the online attunements. It's very similar to how I just tried distant Reiki sessions, and it just like flourished from there. And I was just open to the feedback. And I quickly realized that no, like distant attunements are possible. I was also very skeptical of, like, I thought that if even if you do it online, the student has to be there alive. And just very recently, I got feedback that someone was watching the replay, they got attuned through the replay, and that's also possible. So I'm like learning as I go and opening my mind as we go. But I realized that like there is a lot of benefit in breaking up these teachings over time. Um, so if you had a teaching just over one weekend, you might not be able to get to like 20, 30 different topics, sorry, that like we would be able to if we broke this down over, a few weeks or however long makes sense for you.
Yeah, I think it's also when we say online, we pile up a bunch of stuff, right, in one bag. And I did a training online, the one that is probably the most famous one, the Udemy. You pay like $20. And I have to say, like Reiki one it wasn't bad. I have to say, until I started talking about having clients in a Reiki one online when you have never been like, that was like, okay, you're not that's a little bit too much. But I was like, if I live in the middle of a continent that has no Reiki teacher, I could see how I would benefit from that Reiki one, right? So, but again, those classes that cost $20, and then there are a lot of online trainings, and we're putting all of them in a bag like they don't work. And it has a lot to do with the practitioner. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's where like also we have to stop sometimes. Like I think it's a very personal choice, but I think a good practitioner can teach online in a way that perhaps a practitioner that has little less depth of practice or less experience feeling comfortable on camera or whatever may not. Or maybe
Mm-hmm.
use a little bit more body language, or maybe a little bit more of people who use props and stuff live. And then there's some people who cannot teach online or in person either, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think it's quality. We have to, I just feel like we equate online with poor teaching, and I think that label has to be taken off. We may agree or not with attunements online, but I don't think we can just say online teachings are low quality with the quality of practitioners that are now offering classes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it also really depends on a couple of things. Like, just all online trainings are not built the same. So, again, there's the difference between live and pre-recorded. Then the class size really matters. I find that, like, the classes that are less than maybe about 15 people are just, it makes a lot of sense. And there's also so many beautiful discussions that you can have. We learn from each other's experience in that. Whereas if you have a class with like 100 people, let's say it's pre-recorded, then the experience will be different. And yeah, not necessarily like worse or better, but it's a different way of receiving information, and you can't exactly reflect to someone or ask, there's probably less room to ask questions. So that also makes a really big difference. And then I also find that, like, initially I was getting caught up on the distant attunements, and I was saying that, well, this is not traditional. This is not how Dr. Usui taught Reiki. But in getting caught up in that, I was losing all of the other teachings, and there's so much that can be taught about the precepts, meditation, hands-on healing, just mindfulness, the symbols. And even in a space like New York, I find that it's still hard to find these quality teachings. I mean, it took me quite a bit to find teachers for like almost every level. I remember waiting for months, even 1 or 2 years before I connected with teachers for like all three levels. So I figured like we need to make this more available online, and then also help people to um, like connect with all aspects of Reiki, not just get caught up in the attunements. Um, because like let's say you meet someone, like you meet your teacher in person, and you have the most profound attunement. It's live, it's in person, it's very authentic. But then if they're not teaching you meditations and precepts and mindfulness, the symbols, then like now you're losing so much more of the practice as well. So I'm like learning myself to not get caught up in just the attunement.
I think you said something so important. I'm so grateful that you brought that. I think also that's why I like the word reiju for it, which is spiritual blessing. Is a spiritual blessing to empower you to go a little faster, to remember that you're connected to everything. But at the end, the practice is what really is important. Is those meditations, is that hands-on healing, is working with the precepts. So I'm really grateful that you put that. And also I have to say, Mrs. Takata, supposedly I was reading in a book And she did a couple of distant attunements. So even in the Japanese tradition, I think there's some records of distant attunement. It was never favored, but it was done. So, and again, I'm the kind of person who loves them in person. Part of it is my own self because I like seeing people I like teaching in person a lot. But I think, again, the judgment, we're very judgy sometimes in the Reiki community. And I think what is interesting is, can we take these differences and reflect, right? And you said something like, instead of like, oh, Parita goes attunement online. Hold on, like, is attunement really the most important thing of the practice? An attunement doesn't a practice make. So that is a huge reflection instead of like going to judgment. And for me, that's the beauty of having this conversation, is like we can reflect. We're all different. Let's reflect instead of judge, and go deeper into the practice. So I'm really grateful that you mentioned that. Since you brought the precepts, though, I have a question. Your most beloved precepts and the one that makes you go, oh, I don't want to work with you again.
Um, the one that I love the most is definitely to be grateful, and always just brings a feeling of joy whenever I do remember to call it in. And every time I repeat it, I always feel like, oh yes, there's so much more to be grateful for, and things just start flowing. They feel better as soon as you repeat to be grateful. But I think the one that I resist is probably either to not anger or to not worry, because sometimes that feels like a hard task. But in recent years, I've been shifting the words and repeating more. So I'm free of anger and I'm free of worry. So I think that always gives me permission to be in the worry and the anger for a little bit. And then it reminds me that I have the choice to free myself if I want to. Like I can be free of the anger. Um, whenever I choose that for myself, either in this moment, today, tomorrow, I can free myself.
That's a very empowering take on that. I love that. I use a similar, so I was doing meta meditation and I wanted to do meta meditation with world's leaders. And, they're not the nicest people at the moment. And I could literally not say, may you be happy. I have to say, like, here people know in the podcast, I'm very honest, but I could say, may you be free of anger, may you be free of worry, may you be grateful, may you be compassionate to yourself and others. So I also had that because it's also such a beautiful wish for others, right? May you be free of anger and worry. And that actually I could sit with even the craziest one of them and actually uh, share that with them, and then realize we were pretty much the same. Like that sense of separation from them went away, because I think the precepts are like also like a link of interconnection with all of us. We can all, we all have anger, we all have worry. We could
Mhm.
all do a lot more gratitude and compassion. So thank you for sharing that. And I have the last question, the same. I close the podcast with everyone. Everybody's hearing your beautiful, very calm voice, all your wisdom. But there is also the real Parita who sometimes probably did quite a few oops in her Reiki journey. So I would love for you to share one with everyone.
Um, so I think the one thing that stands out to me a lot is that I came in with a lot of perfectionism in throughout my whole life. And so I was always looking to just master this spiritual routine, like have the most perfect practice, and it had to leave me feeling amazing both on the mat and off the mat. And I would often question like, oh well, why am I feeling sick? I did Reiki today. Or why am I feeling angry? I did Reiki today. So I was looking for just like love and light at all times. And yeah, I mean, now I can look back and realize that, we still live in the human world and this earthly realm. So we're going to still experience like all of the human emotions. We're not saints, and Reiki doesn't completely take away these emotions. it takes away some of the charge, and I think it takes away some of our reactivity, some of our foolishness, but it's not going to make us anything different from human at the same time. So I would tell my past self to like ease up on the perfectionism when it comes to Reiki.
I love that. And I love that like we're humans and it's a beautiful thing to be a human, right? So I love that oops because I think a lot of us come into Reiki as that. Like if I practice Reiki, nothing will go wrong. I will not be angry. I will be this saint-like person. But again, that's ego in a way,
Hmm.
right? Wanting to be so good that we're perfect. That's a little bit of bypassing with ego, although it would be lovely. But then when I see like the Dalai Lama, he makes mistakes and laugh at them, right? He's okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's nice when all of this work just makes you a little bit more open-hearted and like when you can laugh at things rather than take it more seriously. And yeah, so that's what I'm aiming for myself.
Love it. And I have something for you. And I actually drew this in my last Shimpinen training. Uh,
Oh, amazing.
thinking of you. So it's a, can you see it?
Wow, that's so beautiful. Thank you. I've always been a fan of the drawings, and I'm so glad that I get to get one now.
Yeah, it's and I love because there was this sense of openness and lightness and calm, but also connection with everything. So a softening and also that very big energy here in the heart and the hands, connected to the universe. Obviously, the earth. I always have an element of earth, but it was just this sense of I don't know joy, letting go, softness, but very very connected. So.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful image, and just the energy of it is so powerful. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inspiring it. I really had a good time doing that drawing. I was like, oh, I was in such a zen, happy state. So it was lovely. Parita, I'm gonna, of course, leave all your links in the notes so people can reach out to you. I want to thank you so, so much for taking the time to chat with me. I love watching you. I love seeing how you keep changing, how you evolve. And it's just a lovely, lovely thing to witness. I'm grateful that we have you in this world.
Aw, thank you so much. It's been great having your support. I've learned so much from you from trainings and then also just in our chit chats over the years. So I'm glad that I have you in my local area to practice in person with, and really appreciate you calling me here as your student.
Thank you. I'm learning from you like a lot. So that's the beauty of it. We all learn from each other. So thank you so much.